This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Permix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den.
Welcome into episode number 64, the Healthy Scratch interview segment. Noah Grant joined alongside my co-host Nick Maxson and a couple of fellas getting ready to join us here in just a few moments. Nick, who were our guests this week? And more importantly, what did you enjoy about this slightly lengthy but very in-depth and very entertaining discussion with these two fellas?
So we have Derek Felska, who we've had on the broadcast before, and Pat Micheletti as well. Both of them very knowledgeable hockey guys. Again, Pat, former player, as again, Jim Rich would say, former All-American. Derek Felska, just, incredible hockey mind, hockey blogger. I'm surprised he doesn't get paid to write for somebody else, honestly. I think he's that talented. But to trying to dissect a little bit of the Minnesota Wild, their season, their off season, maybe some of the big question marks. I think just overall, my favorite part of this conversation is just talking positively about the Minnesota Wild in an off season. Yes. And again, we'll talk a little, obviously we'll let the interview play itself, but I think it's got a different feel this year. And we'll touch on this too, Noah, but for this team, we're looking at a team that only took seven games in the playoffs, but they were hard fought. They were hard fought against one of the best teams in the entire league, a team that might go all the way to the Stanley Cup final, if not win the Stanley Cup. And it seems like there's some more optimism surrounding this team, even though it was an early exit out of the postseason. And again, it was just fun to talk about the kind of the what ifs, maybe some of the changes that they might make. And these two have got some great insight on that here at the NHL level with this squad.
Yeah, it was a very intriguing discussion. The one thing I will point out, occasionally you might hear a little bit of audio pops or that sort of thing. Sometimes we, with the Zoom calls, sometimes you never know where the status is of the network sometimes. So if you hear a couple of those things, they aren't intentional. They're just part of what they are, but it really did not detract at all, I didn't think, from the discussion. I mean, it just two intellectual guys like you mentioned, and we won't keep you waiting. Pat Micheletti and Derek Felska.
To episode number 64 here at the Huskies Warming House Podcast, the Healthy Scratch interview, and to discuss a little bit more in depth what the Minnesota Wild, their season, as well as a very important offseason. We have Derek Felska from the Crease and Assist blog and the former All-American, as Jim Rich likes to say, Pat Micheletti. Boys, thank you again for stopping by the show. How are we doing?
Just great. It's great to be back with you guys. I was on with you once before. I had a great time, and I'm thrilled to be back.
We paid him to say that, just so everybody knows.
I was going to say, Pat was actually, fun fact for our listeners, Pat was the first ever guest we had on that was on our YouTube page as a guest. So congratulations to him. Episode number 22.
Thank you.
So.
And then Derek, yes, making his second appearance, I believe, coming back to us again. Derek, a very prominent Minnesota Wild blogger. Derek, again, welcome back. You laugh at yourself, but honestly, I think, there's a lot of good, insight that you provide to a lot of the folks that are out there, honestly.
Well, I think I said shortly after I was on, I was going to be the worst guest you had, and I can't believe I'm back. But still, I appreciate the plays. It's all good, and I'm humbled to be here with Pat and you guys. It's unbelievable, especially you guys.
Hey, well, let me just say one thing about Derek, okay? I've never met you. Nice to meet you, Derek. But Derek is one of the most thoughtful, truest individual to me and Brandon Micheletti, my radio partner, and Beyond the Pod and all the other stuff that we do. And I mean, what a gentleman, and thank you. And I know Brandon thanks you, and it's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too. My wife would say the same thing back to you guys both for all the things that you've done over the years and listen to us rant, whether it's on Fanline or whatever. But I appreciate it immensely, and thanks so much for those words.
You got it.
So let's jump right into it, boys. Pat, we'll start with you. First of all, this was a Minnesota Wild season that had a lot of promise. Again, finally, after years of waiting, Kirill Kaprizov, Kirill the Thrill, finally jumped into the Minnesota Wild fold, and he did not disappoint.
Not at all. I got laughed at early in the year when I, and it may have been a little early, but I looked at him and I said, this guy is a top 10 player in the league. And to this day, I believe that. Now you say, well, I can name off this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. And I'm like, well, you have a point. However, this one individual, in my opinion, has completely transformed this organizational thinking, the way they play the game, their competitiveness. So there's a lot of ancillary stuff that I think this guy has brought to the table without even saying a word. And it's very rare that you get a superstar on your team, let alone two when you had Kevin Fiala. And so, I think he's just terrific.
It's interesting, too, to think about when you talk about superstars in the making. A lot of times you think about a team that gets, a high-end draft pick, right? A Jack Eichel, a Connor McDavid, a high-end round. This guy was a fifth rounder. And you think about Kirill Kaprizov. And Derek, I kind of want to ask you this. 51 points in 55 games for the rookie in Kaprizov, 27 goals on the season in the shortened campaign. The question mark now is, what is the asking price for the Minnesota Wild? What are they willing to pay for this young stud? Do they go long-term for this guy? Do they bridge him on a deal? What's the answer for number 97 in the Minnesota Wild?
Well, there's two different perspectives. The first one is from the Wild's perspective. I believe they already offered him 8 years, $8 million a season, which is pretty much almost, it's the max amount of years that they can offer. The question is what are his plans? And while he doesn't have arbitration rights or a lot of leverage that way, the leverage he does have is exactly kind of what Pat was alluding to, in the fact that he's a transformative player for this franchise. He's turned them into a team that people want to watch because they want to see what he's going to do next. And even though he may not have arbitration rights, I'm pretty sure that he could almost pick almost any dollar amount he wants in term, and I think the team would feel very much compelled to try to match that or meet it. And I think that's unique. We haven't seen anything like that, especially for a guy, who's making his, after just one season, he's made that kind of impact on the team.
Yeah, if you guys don't mind, I'll chime in and. Here's my thinking, and here's what I think the team is thinking. I'm thinking they want to sign him to the max and to the max term. Now, if you ask me what the agent and the player are thinking, they're thinking, a 3-year deal is not too bad. I know how good I am. I know I can become a free agent, and that $8 million all of a sudden turns into $12 million, and he will get the max on his next deal. He's that good, and he believes he's that good. So ultimately, I think they settle on a 5-year deal. I really do. I think that's fair for both sides at probably the name the dollar amount, doesn't matter. But I think they'll be somewhere in that range.
I agree with you, Pat. Just a quick little chime in too. I think for the Wild, and especially with a flat cap. I think you're going to have to offer some type of incentive, such as signing bonuses, a lot with what Tampa did with Steven Stamkos to try to give him the money up front. Minnesota offered both Parise and Ryan Suter both $10 million signing bonuses too when they came into the fold. And now seems like an eternity ago, but really it wasn't that long ago. But I think the next question is, Pat, is with that Kaprizov, you still have to sign Eric Sinek, who had quite the breakout season. You also have Kevin Fiala to sign, which means in the expansion draft upcoming, you're protecting all three of those players. You have no movement clauses that you are likely going to have to trade. That puts a guy like, say, Jordan Greenway possibly exposed. And we know with Vegas, they played their cards pretty well in terms of, maybe not taking a player, but getting either young stock or draft picks in return. Do you think Minnesota Wild is in a position to maybe do that kind of a deal with an extra first-round pick this year coming in their way from the Pittsburgh deal?
All right. Well, let's start at the top. They know they're going to lose a player. They have to lose a player. Every team loses a player. Who is that player? We don't know. What it's going to boil down to is that they're going to look at their roster and they're going to say, going forward, what is our best chance to win the cup? Can we win it with player X? Can we win it with player Y or player Z? And do we want them to be part of the fold? Now, it's going to be, I don't know how difficult it will be for them, because I think they're 2 steps ahead in thinking, all right, here's what we got on our current team. Here's what we have coming in. Here's who we might target. So we could see a trade before that, which then may make it a moot point. And I don't want to name a player because I don't know. But so I think there's a lot of factors that go in. And listen, and one thing that I think everybody forgets, right? Just because, let's throw it out there, Matt Dumba is exposed. That doesn't mean that Ron Francis is going to say, oh my gosh, I got to take Matt Dumba. He may have 4 other defensemen that he's already targeted on other teams. And so, you may throw him out there, but you may not, he still may be a part of your team. So, we just don't know.
Yeah, I think the one lesson that you definitely don't want to repeat, and Wild fans found this out all too well in the first round this year, you don't want another Eric Halla, Alex Tuch situation. I think that's quite obvious. It's just, you really don't want to, like we mentioned, every team's going to lose a player, and you got to accept the fact that, it might be Matt Dumba, it might be Jordan Greenway, it might be Marcus Foligno. My question to you guys, Derek, maybe as I flip it over to you, we know Zach Parise, there's question marks about whether or not he'll waive his no movement clause, but you've got him, Matt Zuccarello, Jared Spurgeon, Ryan Suter, right, guys that you have to protect. Of course, 7 forwards, 3D, and a goalie, and then 8 skaters and a goalie if you choose to go that other route. Are there a couple of guys that you're looking on this roster that you say, yep, we're going to hang on to these guys? As you look at your list, what does that look like? Who are the guys that you're feeling maybe you want to hang on for sure?
Well, I mean, apart from just obviously your star players, Fiala, you want to make sure you can protect him. Personally, I think the other thing that comes down to a little bit is, can you get Parise or Suter, who are less likely to be moved through the expansion draft, to waive those clauses so you can protect those other people? Because if you can't, then you're only stuck with 3 spots that you can protect, because there's 5 no movement clauses on the team. That makes it pretty darn tough. And then the other person you may want to protect, I think, you're one of those ones, you're going to want to protect your goalie, because if you let them take Cam Talbot at this point, I think then you find yourself in that conundrum that you had before when you had Evan Dubnyk on the team. You have to secure that position. That's got to be a priority for the stability of the franchise, at least in the short term. I guess the other kind of factor, kind of like what Pat was talking about with Matt Dumba, Seattle may also think, hey, the Wild are in a position where maybe they're going to feel compelled to move him because of the cap space issues that they may be having, and they might think that they can get him via trade anyways. which might be more advantageous, and plus take a player from us. Not just inducing us through like a Holla Tuck situation like you were talking about, but we're kind of maybe in a position where we feel like we're maybe a little bit maxed out, at least in the salaries we're paying for our defensemen as it is.
The only thing I'll say about Dumba, in terms of what you just mentioned, I don't think Bill Guerin's going to trade Matt Dumba to Seattle. Okay. Unless, and I only say this, and I don't know the rules. So you guys, please correct me, because I'm always, I can be wrong. But listen,
join the club.
If they're gonna trade Matt Dumba, right? I think they're gonna try to get a centerman in return. Okay. And whether they can make a deal, listen, when you're exposed, there's a reason why you're exposed. Okay. It's just plain and simple. Yeah, the player may be good, but you know what? You get exposed for a reason. Now, I'm sure, Bill Guerin is going to call every team in the league and see what interest he has in Matt Dumba. And if he can make a deal to try to get a centerman, maybe a package deal, maybe it's have to throw in a number one. I hope they don't. But whatever they know they need to shore up that area. And I think that is going to be a priority moreover than, who you're going to lose.
Pat, I agree with you. In fact, you're kind of leading me to my next question. That is the so-called Jack Eichel watch, which I'm not quite as high in the totem pole as, say, other fans might be. I understand there's intrigue with Jack Eichel. I understand that there's maybe some question marks as to maybe his leadership off the ice, but there's no question what he brings on the ice. He's a heck of a hockey player. He's a heck of a scoring center, and it's definitely probably the one piece that's missing between Kaprizov and Matt Zuccarello as we head into next season. Is that going to be, you mentioned a top priority, but how willing do you think Bill Guerin would be to trade maybe somebody either before or after the expansion draft to shore up the center position? And then I think we need to touch on this Victor Rask a little bit later, but I'll leave that for a second question.
I don't know the interest that the Wild have in him. They may not. I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole, and I'll tell you why. We've seen these lengthy contracts with, now I don't know his age. He's got to be 25, 26, somewhere in that category.
Number 2 behind McDavid, so I think he's 25. Yes.
Okay.
He's got what is it? 5 years left on his deal at $10 million per.
That's correct.
No. 10.
Yeah, 10.
Yeah, 10 million for 5 more years. Yeah.
10 million. No, it's a 8. Is it an 8-year 10 or 10-8? That's what the deal is. And
too much math.
I think it's 10 years, $8 million.
We'll double check.
I'll cap friendly.
I'm almost 100% sure on that number, and I do not want to. And second of all, on my third of all, he's got the neck problem, and you take the risk of him getting hurt. We don't know if he's going to have surgery, not have surgery. Too many red flags for me. High risk, high reward. I get it. But I don't necessarily think that you need a superstar center on this hockey team. It was proven this year that you don't. Say what you will about Victor Rask, was not great, but guess what? He did what was asked of him. And that goes for the, Hartman moving, to the middle. He was asked he did what was asked of him. But do they need, listen, I was looking at their lineup today, right? And I've got 5 guys. Do I have 1, 2, 3, 6 guys that right now are question marks for me at coming back next year. And they are Rask, Bukestad, Johansen, Bonino, Greenway, and Parise. Okay. But I've got 10 other forwards that will fill, the top 3 and, 1 on the 4th line, because I'm adding Matt Boldy in and I'm adding Marco Rossi into this lineup. And, and then I think they could fill out the rest via trades or free agency.
Just to throw this in here, Nick, Jack Eichel, 5 years left on his deal, $10 million average annual value. So,
and that's coming from Cap Friendly, I believe, right?
Correct.
So,
yep. His no movement clause kicks in after next season. So,
correct.
Okay.
And then I kind of want to follow up that with Derek. Again, Eichel getting the majority of the attention, but Sam Reinhardt also on Buffalo, I think, who really led Buffalo with Jack Eichel out being injured, as Pat had reminded us here on the show. But he's an interesting storyline as well, because, as an RFA in the post-season press conferences, he was very non-committal about returning to the Buffalo Sabres. He might be a good option to maybe fill in that maybe supposedly Jack Eichel type role, and he would cost a lot less money. They can get him for a lot less term. Number one, do you agree with that? And number two, if you have Rossi maybe as your one or number two, would Reinhardt be a good complement behind or in front of him?
Well, listen, I don't think Buffalo's going to let him go. I think they'll match whatever he gets offered. When you have the good a player, listen, everybody at the end of the year is miserable, right? You didn't make the playoffs. You lost in the first round or whatever. And, you want the season to be done. And you say things that, right now, you're just in that negative attitude. A month later, things may change. They may circle back. They may have a new coach by then. He may like Don Granato if he is the head coach. I mean, there's so much going on, behind the scenes that, I think Buffalo would match it unless they got a deal they couldn't turn down. And guess what? That would have to include Kevin Fiala, by the way.
Derek, your thoughts on Sam Reinhardt at all?
I think he could be a decent player to have as your top line center. Personally, I would probably ease Marco Rossi into any kind of role, especially after more or less having most of the year off from hockey. I mean, he's only now just getting back onto the ice. So I don't think that's a recipe that says, oh, he's for sure going to be there next year. Yes, but I think you got to be really careful with him. I personally, I mean, he's too important to the long-term future of the franchise to try to rush him back if he's not physically ready to go or healthy. Let alone the that he ended up kind of missing out on because of his myocarditis. That really kind of throws a wrench into a lot of things, unfortunately.
Derek,
but as far as what I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Finish. Yep.
I was going to say that, I mean, I think Reinhardt can play that top role real well. He certainly would be a significant upgrade over what they've had so far. The question is what would it take to get Reinhardt, given, what would the offer have to be, and, would it be counterproductive depending on, I guess, what their ask would be? Because I think Buffalo is tired of being, I mean, they've been miserable for a long period of time, just like Pat said. Everyone's unhappy, especially, I mean, they were one of the worst teams in the league, and it's really ugly. They want to change things too, and Pagula definitely wants to change things. So what's their ask going to be? I mean, they've wanted this guy to work out. I mean, he's had some success there, but how much are they going to make the Wild pay? And, would that stifle us in trying to get a player like that? How much do you have to give up? That's my question, and we don't really know that yet.
Yeah, and I'm not. If it was a player for a player and it didn't include Fiala, you got to think about it. Do they need a guy like Dumba? No, they don't. They have enough D. And, if you look at their depth and they don't. And do you want to give up a number one for him? I quite frankly, I'm not one to give up. I wouldn't. Maybe they will if they feel that he's the right guy, and he's the right guy for longer than 3, 4, 5 years. Then you can do it because he's NHL ready. I get that. Marco Rossi, I hear you. I tell you one thing from talking to him. And knowing his drive, he told me last summer, I'm going to make this team. and that's it. There, end of discussion. And I think he was penciled in. Now, yeah, do we have to see how he's doing? Yeah. And do I think, with two rookies, because I think Boldy's going to make this team, will the team maybe take a little step back before they go back up? That's certainly a possibility. But, I think that, both these guys are going to be in the lineup.
Speaking of taking steps back before you up, let's take a step back to the good old year of July 2012. Why don't we? Derek, you're going to get a chuckle out of this one. And I'll start with you, Mr. Felska. Zach Parise, number 11 for the Minnesota Wild. Has he played his last game in a Minnesota Wild sweater?
I'm going to say no. I think it's going to be really tough to move him. I think he would entertain it. I think he's unhappy. I think that's pretty well documented. But I think it's going to be really difficult to find a trade partner unless we're going to take at least half the salary. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure how many teams are looking for that, especially with the flat cap. That just makes it that much more difficult. If the cap was going up, maybe that would open up some possibilities. But with a flat cap, I think it's a really, really tough sell. And do you really want to give up additional assets to move him?
Yeah.
And can you convince him to be a fourth line, grinder, kind of more of a bit player on the power play? Is he willing to accept that reduced role, which is going to be tough?
Yeah, that's fair. Pat, I wanted to follow up kind of in the similar vein, but I also want to know, as we look towards the expansion draft too, of course, Zach Parise, one of those players with a no movement clause. Does he at least waive his no movement clause in the best interest of the Minnesota Wild in the upcoming expansion draft?
Well, he could do one of two things. Mm-hmm. I think to answer that question, I think they will meet before that happens, before the list is turned in. And if the meeting goes well, then I think he will. If the meeting doesn't go as well as expected, then I don't think he will, because guess what? He holds the cards.
Yeah.
He holds the cards. The bottom line, guys, is Zach, I didn't even watch the press conference because I've watched too many of them, and and it's a game of posturing. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to come back. Oh, we like him. He showed us we're not going to do this. Blah 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 blah. But ultimately, it's going to come down to them coming to an agreement where the player knows exactly what his role is, and what the expectations are. And from the player's perspective, can I accept that? Can I be okay with that? Can I still contribute in this? Am I going to be happy? Because if not, then the player loses, the organization loses, the team loses, and you have chaos. So that there's so many other things that go on, again, that we don't even know about. We can speculate, we can think, but we don't really know, what the feelings are. So ultimately, it's going to come down to the happiness of in a marriage of both parties to make it work. If not, what the options are: you buy him out, you expose him if he accepts it and Seattle takes him, or you try to make a deal and you're going to have to eat half of it. None of them are great options, but you know what? That's why they're in the position that they're in.
Pat, I want to follow up a little bit on the questions with Parise. I'm sorry, Derek, did you have a comment on that? I'm so sorry.
I was going to just say, are you suggesting marriage counseling between Minnesota Wild and Zach Parise? Go on a little retreat together and see if they can.
Well, Derek, let me, and you guys probably know this too, but and you got to look at it from the player's point of view. And all right, this guy was an all-star. He's had multiple points. He's been a captain. He's done it all.
Olympian
right?
too. Yeah.
And you're at the top of the rung, right? And then to be told, well, you're not there anymore. It is very, very hard for a star player to accept the fact that he's not the star player anymore. And so from Zach's perspective, he's thinking, I think I still got it. And they're telling him, well, maybe you don't. And here's where we think we're going to use you. And so, Zach has got to reconcile where he's at. And, then I think, you'll see progress one way or the other.
My question is, Nick, do you think they have extra room for that marriage counseling for you and I in that session too? I think we could use it too, right?
I think you guys need it.
First, you have to agree to come together. So that's step one.
Right.
But it does bring. I think Pat almost took away my question here because I think a lot of what the discussion should be about Zach is especially this year with Dean and with Bill Guerin is we're starting to see finally is this more Zach Parise getting older? And the organization, again, he holds a lot of cards, and it was, I can imagine, at least from my perspective, tough organizationally to try to bring him down to where he was to the point where he's a healthy scratch. Now, we can say about his play all you want, but that's still, like you mentioned, he was an all-star player. He's an Olympian. He's been there, done that, like you mentioned, Pat. But I guess my follow-up question to your point is, if as an all-star player, if he's not raised with this franchise, I guess what is the talk like with that, like maybe his agent? Well, so let's just say, for example, that meeting does not go so well with Bill Guerin and Parise. And I think that, it very well could. How does, that conversation then go back to where Zach sits down with his agent and his agent probably's not, I don't know if he echoes it, and obviously I'm not going to speak for Zach's agent, but, at 37 years old, you're coming to the point where a lot of these decisions have a lot more weight because your playing career is definitely on the, chasing the sunset at this point.
Yeah, it's not easy. I think if they get to the point where they say, okay, it's not going to work here, I think the Wild would give the agents the power to try to work out a deal with another team because, listen, it's not easy. Zach would have to uproot his family, and I know it's part of the business, but it's not a fun part. So I think they would let him try to work out a deal with a team that makes him comfortable, that he'd like to go to, that he has a chance to play, and at a higher level, and try to work it that way. I think Minnesota would love to avoid the buyout, but I mean, crazier things that have happened. So we're just going to have to watch it and let it play out.
Derek, and I want to follow up with you on this one too, because I think the other side of the coin is which hockey teams, and I'm sure there's a few, but who could use a player like Zach, who even at the age of 37 here, we show that he still can be a playoff impact player. He's a guy that, again, when you have that competitive spirit that with Zach has never waned. I mean, that's the one thing about Zach is that he never just has mailed it in. Who could you see entertaining bringing on board Zach Parise despite a lofty cap hit and maybe an aging Zach Parise?
The one team, I guess, that kind of jumps out to me that I think he would be a good fit for would be the New Jersey Devils, where his career started.
Shocker.
I mean, I know, but I mean, I think that's a team that could use some veteran presence. They've traded a lot of that away, and they're a very youthful team. And I think for Zach, that might be, a place where he remembers happier times. And maybe that, they're a team that I think that has the space to actually take him, although I think they would probably ask that the Wild take on some of that salary if they were to have a deal be commenced, because at $7.5 million, that's just for the next 4 years. That's just too much risk for most teams to want to take on a 37-year-old player. But I think the Devils would be a good fit for him. Plus, from a I guess say a personal standpoint, the East travel is a lot nicer and more pleasant than, at least a lot shorter than, and less arduous than being in a Western Conference team. I think that also might make it easier for a player that's more in the twilight of their career. And I think that's, to me, probably the best landing place for him that I can see, for him right now.
Yeah, I was just trying to pull up. I know that we had tweeted a little bit earlier about where Zach Parise was back in 2012, because I think obviously there's no secret there's buyer's remorse, right, for this Minnesota Wild group as you look back on that contract. I think comparatively, when you look at Ryan Suter, may not be the player he once was, but he still has. He's been worth a fair amount of the deal that he signed. I think that's fair to say. But when you look at Zach Parise's statistics entering 2012, I think any team in the league would have taken a chance on him, just what he brought to the table. I mean, let's be real. It's unfortunate in the prime of his career that he had the back injury for 3.5 years that he did, that he really didn't know about. But my question is this. I mean, I know he scores a big goal in Game 7, but you see this Minnesota Wild group, as Nick alluded to, the playoffs had a different feel, even though it was still a first-round exit for this group this year. Pushing back against Vegas to 7 games, Vegas needing pretty much full force of Max Pacioretty to come back and get the job done. Derek, I'll kick it right back to you. Was there something different about this Minnesota Wild team, or did it feel just like another first-round exit to you?
No, I definitely felt it felt a lot differently than some of the other ones. To me, the biggest thing that felt different was their ability to dictate physically in the series, especially the big line of Eriksson, Ek, Greenway, and Foligno. We never really have seen a Minnesota line that took control physically the way that they did at times, dictating the pace of play. And really, the Wild weren't pushed around. I mean, I think of so many other series when we played the Blues or other teams, and I felt like the Wild would almost get ragdolled because they weren't willing to pay the price, and the Wild paid the price this time. And to me, that they showed a little more physical resilience than what we've seen ultimately in Game 7. That early injury to Brodin, I think, kind of took a lot of things away from them, and it fell apart. But to me, they showed more of a playoff brand of hockey than what we had seen in the previous years, where they looked like they were mostly a pretender.
Yeah, I like that answer. It honestly was akin to, I think, that 2014 run against the Colorado Avalanche in the first round. I thought that was probably the next closest comparison. Pat, same question for you. What were your impressions of this Minnesota Wild team? And specifically, I'd like to know your thoughts on number 14 in that center slot for the Minnesota Wild in Joel Eriksson-Ek.
Okay, I'll start. I'll take you back to the playoffs a year ago, and they played the Vancouver Canucks. And they had one guy with speed, one guy, and that was Kevin Fiala. And Kevin Fiala tried to do everything by himself. And they were very slow through the middle, and they were late. They couldn't get their forecheck going. They tried to play a faster game. They saw what Vancouver had in that top line, and the speed and the skill. And I think that was the eye-opener right there, where, when Bill Guerin said, if we're going to compete against these teams, we've got to get faster, we've got to get more skilled, and we got to get deeper. And going into the season, the one area that I think was pretty evident that they did not address, but you can't address everything in one off season, was the center position. I know they had Marco Rossi slotted in when they drafted him to be one of those centers. And then you saw what happened. So that kind of, changed things up a little bit. They had to move Hartman there, moving guys around. Remember Bukestad was there. But the bottom line is they were a faster team. They were a more skilled team than they were in the past. And I think it was a transition year because they're not done. I like I told you, I looked at their roster today, and I count 9 guys up front that are in, and there are 3 holes to fill, in my opinion. And whether they get there, we'll see. As far as Eriksson Ek, right? Phenomenal year. But what is he on a championship team? He is a third line center, okay, in my opinion. And so you have a line, and, picture in your head, guys, a winning championship team and a third line of Eriksson Ek, Foligno, and I'm going to just throw it out there, a Reinhardt back on the right side. Then you got grit, you got a little skill, you got some, FU in you, and you don't take a back seat, you don't get pushed around, and you have the ability as a third line to score some goals, not be counted on to score goals, but to score goals. So I think that is what they're thinking. But we'll just have to see, how this all plays.
Pat, I'm just kind of confused why you didn't put yourself on that third line. I figured you were going to be slotted in next year. What's the story?
Well, here's the reason why I didn't put myself on that third line, because I have 2 new hips, a new knee, a new kidney, and my skates are so far up that you couldn't reach them with, forget it.
They're farther away than Jack Eichel is to you right now. Let's just put it that way.
Exactly. Thank you.
We don't have the cap space.
Yeah.
The cap space.
Hey, that's right. And by the way, do you have my address? No.
No, we don't.
Speaking of cap space, Derek, I'm going to throw this question to you. This is, I think, where the discussion of Victor Rask comes into play. Now, with Pat saying it, I think, very, very well, Victor Rask, for those who wanted, I think the expectations for a lot of fans who whine about him constantly, and I'll use the word whine because it is what it is, were very unrealistic, in my personal opinion. For a guy that was a healthy scratch pretty much all last season, coming in and doing what he did, I thought he was very serviceable for the Minnesota Wild. Now, with that being said, you do have 3 big contracts you have to sign, and every dollar is going to be important. Now, with Victor Rask, when you buy him out, now you're only on the hook for maybe 2 years at a cap. You do save about $2.5 million in cap. Is he a buyout candidate, Derek, or could you see the Wild hanging on to him for one more year? What's your thoughts with Victor Rask?
I gotta jump in here. I love the Giants sigh before that question. I feel the Victor Rask animosity, and I'm excited. So go ahead, Derek.
Yep, I get to counter.
I actually don't have any Victor Rask animosity. None. I really don't. I thought he had a good season. Personally, to me, the thing that it depends on is if you can get other centers. If you can't, you might as well keep him for a season and use him again. Especially, kind of as Pat alluded to, if this is another like a transition year, why not just keep him here, let him play his way out and not have to pay for 2 more years. To me, you want to clear out as much. You want the cap to be cleared altogether. You don't want to add extra obligations down the road because that might compromise your ability to hold on to some of these people that you want to. And to me, I'd rather just ride it out for 1 more season and maybe he'll surprise you again with some newer, younger line mates. I don't know.
All right. Here's the deal, guys. Here's my 2 cents. First of all, I get labeled the Victor Rask apologist, which is completely untrue. Secondly, I'm going to ask you a question. Who did Victor Rask get traded for?
Nino Niederreiter.
Thank you. How popular was Nino Niederreiter?
Not very good for a guy who really drove possession on the third line very well.
How popular was Nino Niederreiter?
It was a very likable.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very much so, right? Yeah. So Victor Rask comes in. First of all, when the deal was made, Nino Niederreiter, with this regime, was going to be a 4th liner because you had 3 guys in front of him. You had Zucker, Parise, and I don't know, whatever. You could look it up. But he's going to be a 4th liner. They tried him on the second line on the right side. Didn't work. They tried him on the first line. Didn't work. They deal him. They save $1 million. Now, they get an injured Victor Rask when he comes to town. He's out. He looks like he couldn't skate with the Bantams. And he, to this day, he's not a great skater, right? Next year, he's plays under Boudreau. Healthy scratch, fourth line, blah, 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 right? So what I think is that a lot of people had the Victor Rask syndrome is what I call it, okay? No matter what he does, get rid of him. Now, is he a superstar? No. Did he do his job with the line mates that he had? I think he did. Was he? And when you play with guys who put up points or goals, or you may not get a lot because they are, and so I think he gets a lot of heckling and a lot of abuse because of everything I just laid out. Now, is he a fixture going forward? Probably not. Is he tradable to another team? Guess what? I bet you another team would take a flyer on him. There's a team like Arizona. There's a team like, hey, do we need a guy that can, kill some minutes, who's a smart player, not the greatest skater, but you know what? Pretty smart player. Yeah, someone might take it. If not, maybe they do buy him out after they see what they have. But, I think he was just kind of unjustly accused or, whatever of the player that he is. That's my 2 cents.
I like that analysis, Pat.
You can disagree.
I'm actually we're in agreement with you, Pat. In fact, those who listen to the show know that Nick and I, but probably myself especially, I'm a Victor Rask lover. I think he does a lot of little things, especially in the defensive zone as a centerman. Being the high guy, being responsible, making the simple play that a lot of people don't see because it doesn't end up on a stat sheet, right? Alleviating pressure. So I definitely agree. I've got 2 questions left. Nick, I don't know how many you've got, but my last Minnesota Wild question here. We had some additions, as we knew, in the last offseason. Nick Bonino, Nick Bukestad, Ian Cole, of course, traded for Greg Paterno, Marcus Johansen, who I don't think has a chance in heck of coming back in a Wild sweater, but who knows? Out of those 4 guys, is there 1 or 2 of those guys that you feel the Wild should take a stab at or feel like they should bring back here? Whoever wants to start, go ahead.
Well, to me, it all comes down to money. They will be the last to get talked to about coming back. It just, they got, their priorities, Fiala, Ek, and Kaprizov. And then what do they do with the rest of them, right? Are they going to make a deal? How much money do they have left? Would they love to bring Bonino back as your 4th line guy? Absolutely. But do you want to pay that guy, $4 million? Or do you want to bring back Nick Bukestad for under $1 million? That they may be forced into that. For me, I like Marcus Johansson, but I didn't see enough of him because he was hurt and he had COVID. And what I do know is that he provides something that they need. He's a smart player. He's a possession type guy player, and he's a great. He passes a puck as well as anybody on the team. Now, what's that worth, right? What is that worth? What do they have coming in? So it may be iffy to bring him back, but it all depends, right? On if they make any deals or who they have slotted. I'm a big where is a guy slotted guy. Okay, where does he fit on this team? And that's what they're going to have to determine.
Derek, same thing for you. I'm kind of in the camp where I think if you can get Nick Bonino and Nick Bukestad for a reasonable team-friendly deal, those are my two picks. I like Nick Bukestad in the corners. I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I think he's a good role guy if you put him in a bottom six. He's unbeatable in the corners. Nick Bonino, like Pat mentioned, a good bottom six guy. The question mark is price. I see you kind of disagreeing with me. We all know how much you love Ian Cole, so what do you got here? Who comes back?
Actually, Ian Cole's the guy I'd keep. The Nick Bukes, when you're talking about his playing corners, I don't know. He's a bigger guy, and for a bigger guy, he seems to get manhandled a lot. And I've never understood that. He kind of reminds me of, this is an old Wild name, but Mark Chenard, another 6'5" guy who seemed to be pushed around a lot. I don't know. I guess for myself, kind of maybe going with what Pat said, I think that they need more speed. And in those bottom six lines, I would like to see them try some younger players, at least, even if there's, younger energy guys like a Brandon Duhaime or somebody like that from Iowa and just let him go and fly on the forecheck. I thought at times that Bonino and some of those guys lacked some speed, where, you saw a little bit faster groups when we were playing against teams like Vegas. I guess for myself, Cole's the only one that I'm particularly interested in retaining, and the rest I wouldn't really lose sleep over losing. That's just my 2 cents.
Here's my deal on Ian Cole. Great guy, great interview, great team guy, great cup cred. Love to have him back, right? But here's my wish list. I think they need to get a horseback on D. Now, and I mean a Joel Edmondson type, a guy that if you're going to come in front of our net, you're going to pay a price. If you're going to come in the corner, you're going to pay a price. Because when listen, during the regular season, guys don't finish checks all the time. In the playoffs, you guys watching it, every time you touch the puck, you get hit. Every time you try to, get a pass through a passing lane, it's filled. It's a completely different animal. And if you're going to make a long run and you expect Brodin, Spurgeon, Suter, even though Suter's as strong as an ox, but you don't want him getting hit all the time either. Dumba, if he's around, who knows? Kalen Addison, not the biggest guy. You need a horseback there or two. Maybe they can keep Cole. I think it's all going to depend on what they end up doing with Matt Dumba, or do they lose Carson Soucy? We don't know. And then ultimately, it's going to come down to what they have, financially, what they have left. They may want Bonino. They may not be able to afford Bonino. They may want Cole. They may not be able to afford Cole. I think the dominoes will fall after those top three are signed.
I got one last question here for you guys. And again, Pat and Derek, this has been phenomenally fun. Thanks again for coming on. I think, let's do what some other networks call us as the way too early predictions fun game. With your roster in your head or written down somewhere for the Minnesota Wild next season, is it possible this team gets past the first round? Or more so, where do you see this team at this time next year? Derek, I'll start with you.
Well, as one of the people that predicted the Wild would not make the playoffs this year, so you maybe shouldn't listen to me. I would say that I think they're going to make the playoffs again. Whether they get, I'm not still sold yet on whether they'll make it out of the first round. To me, it's all what they do with the center. If that's still a question mark, then I think it's rinse and repeat. If they don't get anything and it stays the same, I think it might be a tougher road to get even to the playoffs. That's just my opinion.
And for you, Pat, how does the Wild avoid the Toronto Maple Leafs syndrome?
Well, here's the deal. I think because I think you're going to see two young guys in the lineup. I will go as close to say I would guarantee it, that you're going to see Boldy and Rossi in. People are going to have to be patient out of the gate. However, with the attitude and the culture that has been created and the accountability and the care for one another on that team, I think they'll get through it. I think they'll have an easier time in the first round next year compared to this year, because in essence, they were playing a second round opponent in the first round this year. There's no way they're going to what's the word I'm looking for? They're not going to face a team like Vegas in the first round. Okay. And so, I think the attitude has changed that they will.
Yeah, it's very interesting to think about. Derek, the last time we had you on, I actually have it written down on a note card. You and Nick both picked the Minnesota Wild to finish 5th in the division this year, and I picked them to finish 6th. So definitely exceeded expectations this year.
You guys are negative.
No, I've never been accused of that before. Amazing.
No,
I'm kidding.
I'm negative Nick, so I mean, at least it rolls off my tongue. Jeez.
I was just worried when they mentioned about getting rid of Bukestad. I figured you'd have some qualms since he was a former gopher there, Pat. That's where I was worried about.
Listen, it doesn't matter to me who are the players, what team he plays on. If he can play, hallelujah.
Well, speaking of playing in college teams, my final question for you actually does involve this logo to my my right shoulder here. The St. Cloud State Huskies finishing runner-up in the national championship game to UMass this year. You got a chance, as even more so than we did, to be privileged to cover this group again this year. An incredible run. What overall can you take from the St. Cloud State men's hockey season this year, and what are you looking forward to next year as they're retaining the bulk of their bodies coming back?
Well, I think they have one of the best coaches in college hockey and a staff along with it. I think Dave Shack did a terrific job along with Nick Oliver. What I really have seen in the last couple of years is just a team that is together. And listen, if you'd asked me before the beginning of the year if this team, the team that they put on the ice last year, was going to make it. Was going to get home ice, they did, technically, if you want to call it that. I would have said no. Would I have thought that they would have made it to the NCAAs? My answer would have been no. And I tell you what, they surprised me, and what they have coming back this year is going to be really fun. Really fun. The thing I worry about going into the year, and I'm going to talk to Brett about this, and he probably already knows it, is you can't be complacent. You can't say, okay, it's just going to fall in our lap, because not only do they have to work harder than they did last year, there's going to be a target on their back because they made it to the last game of the year, and everybody wants to make it to the last game of the year. So it's not going to be easy, but I think they will have the team to have the ability to get right back where they were a year ago.
Should be exciting, Pat. I definitely agree. Derek, my last question for you, and feel free to comment on the Huskies run as well, but I really want to ask your question and move a little bit more towards your area of expertise that a lot of people that you follow that I think goes into the radar. That's the Iowa Wild. You keep up pretty heavily on them. How have the Iowa Wild been shaping up in the past couple of years underneath Tim Army? And what can we expect? Maybe, as you mentioned, maybe some young guys that are poised to be those bubble players making a crack at an NHL roster next year.
Well, first of all, you should talk to Pat. Pat watching in person. I've mostly watched through video and listened to a lot of the games. The thing I'll say is that any team that's coached by Tim Army is going to be a hardworking squad that most nights going to outwork anybody. And the last few Iowa teams have really embodied that approach. They're a hardworking team. They come at you. They're really relentless. And the thing that I guess that really kind of, the worst part about it, if there's a worst, is the fact that we'll never know where they could have gone the last two seasons. They were having their best season ever in franchise history, and then the pandemic just stopped it cold, just like that. I mean, they had the goaltender of the year, the defenseman of the year, the MVP of the league all on one team, and they never got a chance to do anything in the postseason because of the pandemic. And then last year, this year they were starting to come around. They were starting to kind of definitely pick up the pace as some of those college free agents started to make their way to Iowa. They started to have more success. And unfortunately, again, there was no postseason for them. And that's a real shame for the Iowa fans who had to endure, I think, almost 5 or 6 seasons of pretty rough hockey where they weren't winning a whole heck of a lot. But there definitely is a development path that I think has been really positive with Tim Armey's teams. And it's become a real strength for the organization as a whole.
Yeah, and I'll add this. What was lacking in that organization for years? Typically, when you're playing in the minors, well, not typically, but the way it used to be, and probably still is with a lot of teams now, guys go down there and they're there for themselves. How do I get to the next level? Me, just me, not you, not my line mate, no, me. And what he has instilled is they're playing for the Iowa Wild. They are playing for the Iowa Wild to win for the Iowa Wild. And within that, you know what? Someone might get called up, whatever the case may be. But their thought process is that team, not the big team, not getting called up. And he's instilled that culture down there. And you've watched them play. They're a different organization down there now, and Tim is terrific. I mean, he's really good.
My introduction. Go ahead, Derek.
I'm just going to add one last thing. The other big transition from last season to this season is the fact that the younger players, meaning the prospect like players, took a much bigger role this season than they did last year. Last year they were still predominantly, led by, I guess, if for lack of a better term, the ringers, the journeymen like Jerry Merrihew and whatnot, Kyle Rao and whatnot. This year, it was Connor Dewar and Kalen Addison, more of the prospect types that were taking on the carrying the scoring workload. So that was definitely a transition because some of those other players were playing on the taxi squad.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Mr. Maxon, I think this is your cue, my friend.
I think it is. Just a couple of quick notes. My first introduction to Tim Armey was when he was on the same bench as Patrick Waugh with the Colorado Avalanche back in 2015. And I've always wondered who that guy was. And sure enough, that was leading the Iowa Wild. And for Pat, for you and me, with this St. Clair State roster, I hope we get to do another game.
I hope so too.
That would be super fun because, that was a really fun call in Duluth with you. And again, I think this team is going to be.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I really do think that this team is poised to make another crack at the final couple of games of the season this year. But from here, us at the Huskies Warming House podcast for our Minnesota Wild Talk here in episode 64, Derek Felska, Pat Micheletti, boys, thanks again for joining us. We'll have to do this again soon. Gentlemen, have a great night.
Thank you.
You too.
Had fun. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Again, just a great discussion, Nick. I mean, it was just awesome to sit down with these two guys and hear what they had to say. It's fun to catch up with Derek a little bit afterwards as well. Of course, getting back from his world, coaching tennis of all things. He's a pretty good little tennis aficionado, if you will. And of course, Pat Micheletti getting ready for radio interview after radio interview. I can't imagine what his expansion draft, schedule is going to look like in the coming weeks. But Nick, we do have some exciting things on the docket. Of course, episode number 65 coming out. Do you remember who our team that we're going to have coming up this week is? Do you happen to remember?
I'm trying to remember. Do we have Omaha?
Picture? We do have Omaha. We got, as Caleb Peabody and J-Mac would say, the Omaha homies. We're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about them as well. So, Nick, what day can we find episode number 65 where we preview the Omaha Mavericks?
So we'll be obviously recording this Sunday and then episode releasing later that day, if not Monday morning. So coming up here pretty soon. And again, the Red Army, again, coming to the fold. We had a really, actually, I think a big stepping stone year for them, Noah. And obviously we'll break it down in more detail, but a team I think that both of us would say is on the rise in the NCHC with some talent as well as a great coach behind the bench.
Yeah, it'll be a great discussion. You won't want to miss it. Of course, trivia as well every Saturday at noon. Be the first to answer on our Twitter page for a chance to get on that leaderboard. Caleb Peabody and Tanner Heath tied at 2 for that lead on the leaderboard. Everyone else, as we like to say, at 1 who has gotten a win correct. But that will do it for episode number 64 of the Healthy Scratch interview segment, and we will see you next week.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it. He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.